For nearly 3 decades, Kelly Hayes-Raitt earned a reputation as a fearless advocate while working on dozens of California legislative and initiative campaigns to protect the environment, secure consumers' legal rights, protect workers, and fight for affordable and accessible health care. In 2006, Kelly ran for state assembly in a hotly contested race. She lost, but we win, as she uses her sabbatical from local politics to bring us a global view of the individual people whose daily lives are affected by America's foreign policies. Today, she'll talk about the people she met while house-sitting in Vietnam, China, and Mongolia, and the reception to an American woman during an election season with huge global implications. Please welcome Kelly.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you, Margaret and David and the Open Circle Committee for inviting me back. It's always a pleasure to be among such wonderful Sunday morning illiterati. Before we get started, I wanted to give just a quick update. When I spoke here in April about the plight of Syrian refugees, I read a dispatch from an American named Franklin Lamb, who had just started an all-volunteer lunch program to feed Syrian children in Beirut. After my talk, many of you generously contributed to that effort, and we raised $700 for his help. Franklin sends his hearty thanks to all of you, and he notes that to date, he and his volunteers have distributed approximately 4,500 meals to Syrian refugee children, 370 of which were paid by our donations. Yay, us! Yeah. So my talk today has a long, wieldy title, Vietnam, Agent Orange, China, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Treaty, Mongolia, and more. And trust me, I have lots more. Some of you may have noticed that the U.S. just underwent a highly publicized election. There's been a lot of griping about democracy, about elections, about candidates, the Electoral College, the length of ballots. And I get it. Negative campaigns are a bummer. But they work. Studies have shown that voters are more prone to believe something negative about an opposing candidate than something positive. And skeptical voters will stay home. When we factor in the confusing Electoral College that underscores the belief that my vote doesn't count, turnout enthusiasm drops even lower. For example, in California, where I vote, 3.7 million people voted for Donald Trump. Yet their presidential votes did not count, as all of the Electoral College votes went to Hillary Clinton as expected. There were probably more of Trump supporters who didn't bother to vote, just as there were probably more Clinton voters in Texas who stayed home, knowing that that state would go red. As a defender of democracy, as somebody who spent her career trying to get people involved in democracy and engage them in democracy, I'm appalled that we're hanging on to this anachronistic system that discourages voters from fully participating. This is where I'm going to be putting my next efforts. On the other hand, many Californians complained about the length of our ballot. They're complaining about what they have to vote about. We had 17 initiatives to consider. A chore? I thought it was a privilege. Whether or not you agree with my particular positions on the following issues, I'm sure we'd agree that these are important public policies worthy of every citizen's consideration. I got to vote to finally eliminate the death penalty. I was in the minority. I got to vote to legalize marijuana. I was in the majority on that one. I got to vote to outlaw large-capacity ammunition magazines for assault weapons. It passed. I got to vote to instruct the legislature to work to repeal Citizens United, that horrible Supreme Court decision that allows corporations unlimited campaign contributions. That too passed. Along with the majority of California voters, I was allowed to raise cigarette taxes, restrict diverting funds from Medi-Cal, maintain taxes on the wealthy, and redirect plastic bag fees to environmental programs. I was a proud voter on November 8th, being able to vote for those things. I'm proud of my democracy. But I have to tell you that the initiative in California that got the highest margin of victory, 10 points higher than Hillary Clinton's vote turnout in California or Kamala Harris's victory, is an issue that is very near and dear to me. A whopping 73% of Californians voted to restore bilingual education in California.
Yay.
Yay. And so you may be wondering, bilingual education had been banned in California? Yep. In 1998, nearly 61% of voters passed an initiative to ban bilingual education in California's public schools. Now, through a waiver program, immersion bilingual education was exempt from the ban and did continue to flourish and does today. But any child who was a non-native English speaker in a public school could not receive education in their native language to learn the harder subjects like science, history. I was the statewide spokesperson on the no side of that campaign in 1998, debating a Silicon Valley guy whose self-described mission is to create a nationwide movement to dismantle bilingual education. He claimed that teaching children hard subjects in their native languages while they learned English was a bad thing. It was a bruising, racist campaign. And although we got our butts kicked 18 years ago, we were vindicated on November 8th, and now non-native English-speaking kids can get the extra educational help they need. I was a very proud voter on November 8th. I want to shift now and just talk a little bit about the extraordinary summer that I had in Vietnam, China, Mongolia. Please do not judge me on my cartography skills. Obviously, that's not my strong suit. This is, for those of you who can't see in the back, this is Vietnam, Hanoi. This is China, Beijing. This is Mongolia. Ulaanbaatar is its capital. Russia, Kazakhstan. This is the South China Sea. Japan's way over here. Korea's down here. Sort of. If I remember correctly. So there were two themes that ran through my summer while I house sat this summer in Vietnam, China, and Mongolia. The prevalence of English and the pursuit of democracy. Let me linger on the first point with just a couple of quick vignettes. Well, I was in Hoi An, which is on Vietnam's central coast, kind of down here. I was headed in a van for a day of scuba diving. There were 13 of us in the van. We came from Vietnam, of course, our van's driver, France, the Netherlands, Morocco, the Philippines, and Andorra. How many of you know where Andorra is? Right? It's a little tiny country sandwiched between France and Spain. All 13 of those people, or all 12 of the people besides me, everyone spoke English. And everyone except me, the only American, spoke at least a second language proficiently. I heard spoken in the car French, Spanish, Catalan, Arabic, Dutch, German, Vietnamese, and Tagalog. So while I may be a proponent of bilingual education, I'm not a practicer of it, unfortunately, I have to say. But I try to engage people as much as possible with my English because people wanted to practice English. So also in Hoi An, while I was in my hotel's swanky swimming pool chatting with a local Vietnamese woman who was there on a day pass with her family, I kept smiling and encouraging her quiet 4-year-old son who was paddling around in his little blow-up donut. And I figured he didn't speak English because he was so quiet. Later, she emailed me and wrote, "Kelly, my son told me, Mammy, do you remember the American lady? She said, good job when I was swimming. When will we meet her again?" While strolling along the streets of Hanoi one evening, a young man approached me and said he was selling fresh squeezed tangerine juice to raise money for his university's English club. As I was handing over my money, he admitted that one of his assignments for the English club was to engage a stranger in an English conversation. And then he asked me about the Trans-Pacific Partnership Treaty. Well, Tung turned out to be one of the most intelligent, curious, sensitive 19-year-olds I've ever met. After the police kicked him and his friends out of the park for selling this juice without a license, we sat on a bench for over 2 hours talking politics. But I have a little bit more on him later. I was just so impressed with how the mastery of a second language opened so many opportunities for me, and I was really grateful that so many people around the world had taken the time to learn English. And I also realized how isolating the lack of a second language could be. While house sitting in Yan, which is kind of right here in China, this is a small Chinese village of only 1.5 million people. I lived in an airy communist-style cement block apartment building up 7 floors, no elevator, on the grounds of a school. Once the people, a French woman and a Scotsman, whose rabbit I'd be caring for, had left, I was the only non-Asian face I saw for 10 days. I was quite the celebrity. Everywhere I went, people wanted photographs with me. But no one spoke English in this Chinese village. I communicated by illegally accessing Google Translate on my laptop and photographing the Chinese phrases on my iPhone so that I could show those to taxi drivers where I wanted to go. The Chinese, of course, though, they have, mobile phone translation apps, and they were quite popular on their phones, but they weren't always accurate. I was in a public transportation van one day, and a woman sitting over here spoke into her cell phone and passed it down to me, and I looked at it, and it said, "Are you a man needs parts?" I think so. I passed it down to her with a, She spoke again into her phone, passed it down. "Are you a man needs parts?" I stared at that, and then finally I looked at her and said, "Yes, I'm American." Very good, very good. My summer's other theme was seeing how far people will go to pursue democracy. I arrived in Hanoi just 2 weeks after President Obama's visit in June. He was enormously popular there. Of course, the first thing he did was lift the arms embargo. And his Trans-Pacific Partnership Treaty is wildly popular in Vietnam. The Vietnamese loathing of China is pretty evident even in casual conversation. Politically and economically, the Chinese just aren't winning hearts and minds among the Vietnamese, Malaysians, Japanese, and Filipinos, with the exception of the new Filipino president, Rodrigo Duterte, who seems intent on cozying up with China as he executes thousands of his own people for alleged drug crimes. But China has long been overfishing in the South China Sea, jeopardizing the livelihoods of fishermen whose fathers and grandfathers have fished these waters. This is the South China Sea, so it comes down where Hanoi is. Thailand is down in here. As I said, Japan's over here. The Philippines is over there. So this whole area is being heavily fished by Chinese corporate interests. In addition to that, China is now building artificial islands in order to claim territorial rights in these open waters. The South China Sea is one of the busiest trading routes in the world, with more than $5.3 trillion of shipping traveling through each year, and 20% of that belongs to the U.S. 12% of the world's fish catch, the total global fish catch, comes from the South China Sea. Additionally, there is an estimated 11 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas beneath the surface. So whoever controls these waters controls the fishing, the fuel, and the trade routes. So President Obama was astutely using the animosity that China's created to create a broad trading partnership among 12 countries that ring the South China Sea. That's kind of up for grabs now because both Trump and Clinton were opposed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, so it's likely dead. And we're going to see what kind of efforts now President-elect Trump has to go through to deal with China. But in order to be part of the TPP negotiations, Vietnam had been moving toward a market economy and slowly introducing some democratic principles. The Vietnamese I met, from 19-year-old Tung to taxi drivers, all spoke about new opportunities under a free market economy. There was a sense of this new opportunity in Mongolia as well. Quote, "It's like a college campus," one visitor remarked. Indeed, nearly half the population is under the age of 25, and the average life expectancy for men is only 65. So the country is both young in people and in its politics. But first, let me give you a little bit of context. Mongolia is 1.5 square kilometers, about the size of half of Western Europe. It's the world's largest landlocked country, and it's the world's least populated country. It has 3 million people, half of whom live in Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital, and a half are primarily nomads, living in all this undeveloped land. It also has one of the highest literacy rates in the world, 98%. So no story about Mongolia could possibly be complete without mentioning Genghis Khan, right? So you're going to get a little quick history lesson here. In 1206, Genghis Khan, who is also became known as Genghis Khan, which means universal king, founded the Mongol Empire. It was the largest empire in history. The Mongol Empire's territory extended, so picture this if you can, from present-day Poland in the west to the Korean Peninsula on the east, from Siberia in the north to the Arab Peninsula and Vietnam in the south. It covered approximately 33 million square kilometers. One of the things that I was told in Mongolia is that what made Khan such a successful conqueror, it's kind of an oxymoron, but a successful conqueror, is that he allowed people to keep their own languages and religious practices. When Khan died in 1227, the Mongol Empire was divided into 4 kingdoms, with Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, ruling present-day China and Mongolia. Then, dynasties came, dynasties went. I'm going to skip ahead to 1911. During a revolution in China in 1911, Mongolia declared itself independent. However, China still claimed what it was then called Outer Mongolia and invaded in 1919. In 1921, Mongolians, with the help of the Russian army, fought back, and Mongolia became the second socialist country in the world. For the next 69 years, Mongolia was ruled by a Soviet-dominated communist regime. Suddenly, land and animals were no longer privately owned. Mongolian Cyrillic writing was banned and replaced with Russian Cyrillic. Russian became the second language. There was no freedom of speech, no freedom of movement. Wait a minute, it's a nomadic country. What do you mean no freedom of movement? How does that work? That's right, I was told. Nomads were assigned specific geographic regions within which they could live and graze the state-owned herds. And even today, nomads are still fairly rooted. They have specific areas where they camp each season and generally stay in one place for months at a time, even with their ger tents. In fact, the ger tents that we saw, some of them had solar panels, satellite television, and satellite phones. Back when the Soviets took over, in 1925, in order to disconnect people from class backgrounds, the communists banned last names. And today, many Mongolians still go by one name, although that is changing. In 1937 and 1939, there were some violent great purges, where the communist government that was close to Stalin killed more than 20,000 people, 20,000 Mongolians. Estimates run as high as 33,000 people, which was about 3% of the Mongolian population then. Victims were academics, writers, thought leaders, people considered to be political opponents, a half of whom were Buddhist monks. Because the monks were among the few elite who could read and write. Before the Great Purge, there were 800 Buddhist monasteries. Only 4 survived, and only one, the Ganden Monastery in Ulaanbaatar, reopened. Buddhist art was destroyed, and huge sculptures were melted down. But women had equal rights, I was told by Narangal Richin, who served until this last May in the new democratically elected parliament. She now runs a summer camp to teach children about democracy and environmental stewardship. We were all equally oppressed, Nara rolled her eyes during one of our many conversations. The Soviets weren't about to ignore 50% of its labor possibilities, she explained. So after 69 years of this communist rule, on December 10th, 1989, which is International Human Rights Day, a small group of protesters, inspired by glasnost and perestroika in the Soviet Union and the collapse of the communist regimes in Eastern Europe, they started a hunger strike in Sukhlaktar Square. Nara, my buddy, was among a handful of college professors who resigned their positions to protest full-time. They protested in the square outside the Parliament building during the winter. Winter temperatures in Ulaanbaatar fall so far it can freeze your eyelashes. The Mongolian communists, who were under pressure from Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to avoid conflict, and everybody was worried of repeating the Tiananmen Square bloodshed that had rocked China just the previous year, those Mongolian communists voluntarily ended 69 years of single-party rule, and in March 1990, created a democratic government without a single shot fired. Under the new multi-party system, the communists still won the first two elections. They ran everything, Nara explained, the election system, the newspapers. But in 1996, the Democratic Union Coalition won, and Mongolia's first non-communist government was installed. A new constitution was written that was modeled after the U.S. Declaration of Independence, and by constitution, 20% of each party's candidates must be women. And today, 13 of the 72 members of parliament are women, which is about 15% of parliament. As an aside, only Bolivia and Rwanda have majority female governments. One of those Mongolian female MPs, a woman named Mayangaro Tsenda Damba, hosted our delegation for dinner. It was a pizza party, and she gave us her campaign t-shirt. Now, I have to tell you, I am really proud of wearing her campaign t-shirt today, because just a little over a generation ago in Mongolia, I would have been arrested for wearing a t-shirt like this. So it's a big deal to be able to do this. Democracy was a really hard road, though. When Soviet subsidies stopped in the early 1990s, they were followed by several years of food shortages and rationing. The communists had provided free health care and education, but suddenly that was gone, and families couldn't afford health care and education. There was no financial base for the new market-based economy. People were so poor. I heard stories about parents taking their children shopping and then abandoning them. I heard stories about women going into the hospital and giving birth and leaving because they couldn't afford the medical bill. And the nurses would pass the newborns along from wet mother to wet mother to nurse them. Street children, once not an unheard of problem in Mongolia, became a huge problem in Ulaanbaatar. They would live beneath the manholes during the winter to escape the biting cold that can drop to negative 30 degrees Celsius. But in spite of this, Mongolians persevered in their pursuit of a democracy, and today they are fiercely, fiercely proud of their achievements. The atmosphere today is one of excitement and opportunity. I had the chance to meet Richard McKenzie, an American doctor from Los Angeles Children's Hospital, who's been visiting Mongolia since 1994 to help train Mongolian doctors. This is the way he describes Mongolia today. Mongolia is an exciting country that is experiencing its own political and civic adolescence, full of rebellion, creativity, opportunity, social exploration, and testing out the novelty of democracy. I was in Mongolia on a trip organized by the Delegation for Friendship Among Women, a non-political organization started in 1963 by Robert McNamara's wife, to, quote, nurture friendship between women from the U.S. and other countries, and to seek nuanced understanding of women's work and lives throughout the world. The delegation accomplishes its mission primarily by self-funded study trips to countries where formal relations with the U.S. are often in transition. And wow, is Mongolia ever in transition? We met with a wide variety of leaders. People from the Nature Conservancy to the founders of orphanages, to television news producers, to young women who are challenging traditional views of body image, rape, and sexual harassment. In fact, these women even staged a performance of the vagina monologues. We met with a U.S. ambassador, and we even had lunch with the First Lady of Mongolia. She's really fascinating. First Lady Balarma has a degree in geochemistry, and she worked as a mineralogical engineer. She's a mother of 5 children, and she has adopted and raised 23 orphans. Her husband, President I could never get this one right, Albegdorj of the Democratic Party, was elected to office in 2009 and re-elected for his second term in June 2013. A new presidential election will occur this coming June in 2017. Now, at 25 years old, Mongolia's democracy is still fledgling and floundering, just as its economy is. Just a few short years ago, Mongolia's economy was among the fastest growing in the world, with a robust 17% growth in GDP, largely due to minerals, commodity sales, and Chinese mining investments. Mongolia has the world's largest copper deposits and lots of nickel reserves, but only few environmental safeguards are currently in place. When the minerals market collapsed, the economy slumped badly. And while most Mongolians want a more diversified economy, they realize it won't happen overnight. So the default stance on mining seems to be, let's do it responsibly. But in my perception, there's a huge gap between what the government legislates and what they seem able to enforce. So time will tell what happens with environmental safeguards. But there are, however, activists fighting to protect their land. My friend Nara, who served in the parliament, successfully stopped a Chinese firm's attempt to mine copper in her ancestors' land in northern Mongolia. She was like right kind of up in here is her ancestral land. And this is now the place where she runs a summer camp to teach children about environmental stewardship and democracy and justice. Education, which was important under the communist system, is still revered in today's Mongolia. As I mentioned, Mongolia has one of the highest literacy rates, and schooling is mandatory. In the countryside, nomads send their children away to school. The kids live with relatives or in dormitories from the time they are 6, and they return to their families on the weekends. Consequently, the children are quite independent, and I was really touched by the way they protect each other and help each other out. I saw that in the schools, and I saw that in the orphanages. Part of the mandatory K-12 curriculum is a study in democracy and civic participation, created by NARA, modeled on a program created in Los Angeles. So from an early age, children learn about the values and the responsibilities of democracy. I was also just sort of personally interested and intrigued by this statistic. 70% of higher education students are women. Healthcare is another area where Mongolia is struggling to stand on its feet. Providing care for nomads in the vast countryside is an ongoing challenge. I was told about one child who needed hospitalization, but would need to travel for 3 days by jeep and by reindeer to get to a hospital in Ulaanbaatar. With a winter that lasts 9 months, vitamin D deficiency is quite high. Most Mongolians, especially those in the countryside, drink their own yak milk. Fortified milk is not a staple. Domestic violence is a major health concern. DV is currently not a crime, but a law was passed by the last parliament to criminalize it. One of the flaws in Mongolia's democracy is that it doesn't include staggered terms. So the entire parliament is elected every 4 years, which creates a lot of lack of continuity and a lot of confusion. During last June's election, there was a major party turnover from the Democratic Party to the Mongolian People Party, which is the old Communist Party, and the new DV laws was suspended. So we're hopeful that the new MPs, female MPs that have been elected, will be able to reinstate that. But one of the biggest environmental and health problems is air pollution. Ulaanbaatar is completely ringed by mountains. During the winter, people living in the 200,000 garret tents that ring the city burn coal in order to keep warm and in order to cook. And it creates a huge air pollution problem. In fact, Ulaanbaatar is the world's second smoggiest city. Recent studies link air pollution to high rates of miscarriage. Pregnant women are 3 times more likely to miscarry if they give birth during the smoggy winter than in the spring or in the summer. But the government's tackling that head on. They give registration cost breaks to people who own a Prius. So during one 5-minute taxi ride, I did an experiment and started counting the number of Priuses I saw. I counted over a dozen of the hybrids on Ulaanbaatar streets in about 5 minutes. And they're also trying to replace the coal-fueled garret stoves with cleaner burning stoves. But from a geopolitical standpoint, Mongolia is pretty strategically located to serve U.S. interests. Russia, China. And I noticed that the U.S. has an increasing presence in Mongolia. In fact, during our trip, U.S. soldiers often shared the elevators with us at our pricey hotel. They were in Ulaanbaatar, they said, for training exercises. But as you can see, Mongolia is in what our embassy, the U.S. Embassy, calls a tough neighborhood. One visitor said that Mongolia is China's hat and Russia's underpants. So what else is going on in modern Mongolia? The Beatles are really popular. They were banned under communism. I'd like to end my presentation today, though, by bouncing back to Vietnam. Among all the incredible encounters I had this summer, the most poignant was visiting Hanoi's Friendship Village, where children born with defects likely caused by Agent Orange live. Agent Orange not only embeds in soil for 500 years, but it turns to dust, spreading its toxicity even further than the 20 million acre area we contaminated for 10 years between 1961 and 1971. The United States assaulted Vietnam's jungles and its people and our own soldiers with 19 million gallons of the deadly defoliant. The Friendship Village was started by George Mizo, an American soldier who enlisted to fight for freedom in Vietnam. But he became so disillusioned with America's use of dioxin and Agent Orange that he refused to return after he recovered from battle injuries, and he was thrown in a U.S. military prison for 2 years. Can you imagine? This guy voluntarily enlisted, was hurt in battle, and then refused to go back and was imprisoned by our military. Today, the village houses dozens of children and is a place for Vietnamese soldiers to get medical care. I'd like to just end with reading an excerpt from an email I sent to a few friends the night after I visited the village. Dear friends, totally exhausted on every level tonight. I woke early this morning to meet my new translator, best amigo, Tung, a 19-year-old student of mechatronics. Tung and I met when he convincingly sold me a glass of hand-squeezed tangerine juice to raise money for his university's English club. Tung's English is fantastic, and he, his buddies, and I got into a serious, detailed political conversation about China's incursion in the South China Sea. He and I headed to a park bench, and spent 2 hours yammering about politics. This kid is sharp. He's also studying German and Japanese. So I hired him to accompany me to the Vietnamese Friendship Village, a compound where children born with defects likely caused by Agent Orange live. The village is the brainchild of an American Vietnam War vet and co-started with a general from the Vietnamese Army. Turns out, as they learned later, the two men's platoons had faced off against each other 40 years ago, with the Vietnamese general wiping out the Americans' entire platoon. Video of the two embracing over their common desire to help maimed children brought me to tears. The kids were incredible, very loving, accepting, many knew bits of English from the many American visitors, very disabled, beautiful spirits. Some of the kids are a little scary looking. Some made me wince at their pain and deliberation in moving. Some were overwhelming with their emotional problems. One kid continuously threw himself against a wall during the few minutes we were there. All seemed to be loved and respected. At one point, I looked at my 19-year-old translator, and he was visibly moved. There was a group of French high school students volunteering when we were there. Between classrooms, Tung said to me quietly, "I feel so mean. These girls have come halfway around the world to help these children. I live right here." Later, he volunteered, "Kelly, please don't pay me for today. You're doing so much to help my country. I can't accept money from you." I feel humbled. All I do is write and run. I tell myself that my writing touches people and that will ripple out or matter, but who knows? At least today, I know a sensitive, smart 19-year-old was altered because I dangled the translator job. Agent Orange is really bad stuff. It stays in the ground for 400 to 500 years by conservative estimates. The U.S. continued poisoning the people it reportedly was there to help for 2 years after Monsanto and Dow's studies proved that dioxin, the main ingredient in Agent Orange, was one of the deadliest chemicals ever created. It was quite meaningful, though, to see the coming together of several countries to create and fund this village. It's healed more than bodies, spirits, too. As American and Vietnamese veterans of the war have joined throughout the years in reconciliation, I think that's the hardest thing, reconciliation. Braver than hiding behind a bullet or a bomb, to forgive oneself and one's enemy, and to see beyond that polarization in order to create common ground, to embrace the enemy both within and without. Well, that's really it, isn't it? I think that confrontation is the bravest thing there is. Love, Kelly.
Thank you. So we have time for questions. Please ask questions so we can learn more from Kelly. Less statements. A mic will be brought to you, and Michael's going to show how it's done. Stand up, Michael.
Hi. I have really two questions. Does China still reckon that Mongolia is really part of China? That's one question. And is there any chance that democracy will seep south from Mongolia?
Great questions, Michael. Thanks so much. I don't have the ear of the Chinese government, so I don't know if they still consider Mongolia to be theirs. I don't think so, though. It's been enough time. It's been, almost 100 years. And the American interests and other Western European interests are in Mongolia, so it feels that they're becoming more and more entrenched. Although Chinese money is there, and the U.S. is not happy about the amount of money that the Chinese are spending there on mining interests, because we really don't want Mongolia to be solely dependent on China for its meal ticket. So there's really an attempt to try to diversify the economy. Any chance that China will become more democratic? I didn't see that while I was over there. I couldn't access Facebook and Google legally. So, it's kind of crazy. There's still a lot of repression.
Over here.
Hi, you're the first person I've heard raise this question about Agent Orange. I've thought for years that's the worst use of a weapon of mass destruction ever. And the second is the use of atomic weapons during the Second World War by the United States in both cases. Yeah, well, actually, I just wanted to make that point. And the United States invaded Iraq for the very reason they said weapons of mass destruction. They didn't have any, causing probably 200,000 deaths.
Thank you for making that point.
Hi, Kelly, I really enjoyed your talk. How many frequent flyer miles do you have? My question is, I had the opportunity to go back to Vietnam as a civilian in 1990, and our little group from Hawaii found out that if we wanted to do business with the Vietnamese, that we had to go through the military. Is that still in force today, that you have to go through the military?
That's a great question. I don't know. My guess is probably not, that there's maybe some other ways to do it now, because there really is a feeling that it's opening up to more of a free market, which of course causes problems, because nobody's talking about what that would mean for the small mom and pop farmers, right, when the agribusiness comes in and so forth. So there's really not a lot, from what I could see, and it was a very limited experience because I don't speak Vietnamese. It just felt like there was a vibrancy to the place with new money and new hope coming in because of a market economy. So I don't know what the rules are like now. Did you get a chance to go to the Friendship Village? I'm not sure that it was actually open in 1990. I think it was later.
No, we did not.
Okay.
And Agent Orange is horrible. Horrible.
Here.
Thank you, Kelly. I was wondering, as you were talking, that previously our Western policy has been to, so to speak, if democracy doesn't, if you don't come to democracy, we'll bring democracy to you, and it comes in the form of little bombs that are falling down. Now here we have Mongolia, a country that's squeezed between two superpowers. Would you say that's an example that people eventually themselves decide what their fate is and what they want, and they do the right thing, so to speak, in our mind, rather than going in there and forcing it on them and destroying it? And I mean, Vietnam also has come together very nicely, peacefully, no problem. Why did we go there in the first place?
I don't want to make a judgment on whether, on how democracy gets built. I think any kind of political or social structure needs to come from the bottom up rather than top down in order to be successful and to stay for, and in order to be sustainable. And certainly Mongolia's was, and they were at just the perfect time in history because that was when Lech Walesa was active and Václav Havel, and all of Eastern Europe was falling, and it's all 88, 89, 90, and their struggle was from December 89 until March of 90. So it was exactly that same period of time. So they lucked out, I think, partially just because where they were in history. But I was so inspired by the way people really continue to struggle and want that democracy and participate in it. I didn't hear anybody complain about voting or ballot lengths. Didi.
I have a very little question. What does your shirt mean?
I don't know. but it is Oyuna. This is definitely her, and she served in the parliament. She also was a minister. She was Minister of Culture and Education. Where's Connie Davis?
She's over here.
So Connie Davis was in Mongolia at the same time I was, although we didn't know it. And Connie had the opportunity to spend most of her time in western Mongolia over here. This is Sengul and Olgi. This is the area, this is Kazakhstan. And there's a little brief sort of land area here where Russia and China meet. This is where the Eagle Festival happens. And Connie had a chance to go to the Eagle Festival. I can't wait to see her photos. And she stayed with the family of a girl named Isafal. Is that the way you say her name, Connie? Aishapan, who is an eagle huntress. She is a 12-year-old girl who is the first female to learn how to use an eagle for hunting. Now let me just back up. It gets pretty darn cold out here in the winter. So one of the things that has been sort of passed down during the years is this tradition of eagle hunting. And it's been passed down from man to boy to boy. Only males do it. And you go, and this is going to sound horrible, you go and you steal a baby eagle and you train it to go hunt for you. And then that's what the families live off of during the winter, is what this eagle hunts. And they keep this eagle for 7 years. It's a revered part of the family. And then they release it into the wild and teach it and release it and let it go. Alsapan wanted to become an eagle huntress. But all the village elders said, no, you can't do that. It's only boys. But her father and mother said it's okay, and they taught her to be an eagle huntress, and she ended up winning all of these contests that happened during the eagle hunting competitions. And a new documentary has just been made about her called The Eagle Huntress, and it is a stunning documentary. The cinematography is fantastic. If you get a chance to see it, when you're traveling, I don't know that it would come here, but if you're traveling someplace else, you get a chance to see it. I highly recommend it. It's the most inspiring movie. And Connie lived with her family, which is very cool. And the reason why I brought this up is that Ayuna was the Ministry of Education and Culture at the time and helped grease the wheels for that movie to be made. So, yeah.
So we're only going to have time for, I think, one more question.
I was a little surprised to hear that, or not surprised to hear that we already have a military presence in Mongolia. You rode the elevators with them, you were in the hotel with them, with the U.S. military. You probably cannot answer my question because I doubt those U.S. military people really opened up what they were doing. But do you know our role of the military in Mongolia? Because we have a history of being interventionist, the U.S. I'm talking about, and feet on the ground is not always a good thing. People get shot. Can you speak at all any more about that issue, or us being there?
Yeah, I walked into the elevator and there were 3 soldiers there in full khakis, and I said, oh my goodness, are we at war? And they said, I hope not. And they said they were there for training exercises, and that was kind of as much as I could schmooze out of them. So that's it.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Kelly will be here for